So, thank you all for coming. This is a joint meeting of the planning board, the energy committee, and the LEAC, and other honoraries and people of high dudgeon who are here, and I thank them very much for coming. So why don't we just get started with Mark? He's got a whole thing to educate us with, so.
Yeah, so thanks, John.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Mark Bollinger from the Energy Committee.
Yeah, so thanks, John, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this wintry evening, and I don't know if we have anybody online.
I don't believe so.
There's nobody there? Okay. Anyway, in terms of context for this meeting, we have that advanced. As I think probably all of you know, there are a number of overlapping or semi-overlapping energy-related activities that are ongoing in Lyme. The planning board, of course, has been working hard on their proposed solar zoning amendment for several years now, I think. Not constantly, off and on. And at the same time, they've been fielding at least one commercial solar proposal, I think probably the first one in town that I'm aware of. The Energy Committee over this period has been working on implementing the town's adopted goal of moving towards 100% renewable electricity by 2030. And then more recently, the Aggregation Committee has been looking into the merits of community power or municipal aggregation as a way to kind of help Lyme meet its 2030 electricity goal. All three of these efforts have at least one common thread, which is that they all involve or could involve large ground-mounted PV systems, perhaps even right here in Lyme. And what's become clear as a number of us have kind of grappled with some of the issues raised by these larger ground-mounted systems is that there's really no single person in town that has a kind of a complete picture of what's happening or what the issues are or how we might coordinate better. And that's because there's really no single person that sits on all three of these boards or committees, though I do want to recognize both Jim and Hebe, who are each on two of the three committees. And so I guess the idea behind this meeting was really just to get together and try to share information in the hopes that we could kind of bring each other up to speed on what all of us are doing and try to find some opportunities for collaboration. If we can succeed, then I think the town as a whole will benefit from better solutions. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, this mask. I might just take this off. I'm having trouble reading with that. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Could you hold her breath up?
I'll try. All right, that's better. So unless someone has a better idea, the agenda that I guess I would propose here would be that maybe I run through some of these slides as sort of an introduction as to what the Energy Committee's been up to in terms of moving towards the 2030 goal, particularly with respect to kind of looking into larger ground-mounted systems as a way to help us move in that direction through what's known as group net metering. And then after that, we turn over to folks on the Aggregation Committee to tell us a little bit about what's going on with community power in town, and not only in Lyme, but also in some of the neighboring communities which are maybe a little bit further along than Lyme is at this moment. And then, after that, I think we'd probably turn it over to the planning board to react to the first two agenda items, if you have any reaction. And then also maybe it would be useful to hear from you all whether there's anything in particular that you're struggling with and that you think any of us could potentially help you with over the coming year.
Yeah, I'd just add to that some people came tonight who also might want to add.
Good, yes, absolutely. And then if we're particularly ambitious, we might end up with some to-dos for each group to head home with. I do want to emphasize, though, that the overarching goal here is really to share information, so I guess I would like to keep this informal and loose, which means that folks are encouraged to ask a lot of questions and to feel free to interrupt me or any other presenters in order to ask your questions. So let me just pause there before moving on, and I don't know, John, do you want to say anything else, or Jim, you know, as chair of the Energy Committee or the Aggregation Committee, do you have anything to add at this point?
No, I think you set it up well. Thank you.
I completely agree with you.
Okay, great. All right, so I thought I would just start with just a little bit of high-level background on Lyme's renewable energy goals, which the town overwhelmingly approved at the 2020 town meeting. The most near-term goal is to consume 100% clean renewable electricity by 2030, and that'll really be the focus of tonight's meeting. And then we have this longer-term goal to do the same in the heating and transport sector, and that one hits up by 2050. So that's probably not something we'll touch on tonight. We can come back in 10 or 12 years to discuss that one probably. But when I think about the electricity goal for 2030, it seems like there are, you know, at least 5 ways that the town might move in that direction. The first one, you know, the default service utilities that all of us or most of us deal with could shift their generation mix more towards renewable power over time. And though there are a lot of utilities in the US that are doing this, and you'd think that it would be kind of a trend nationwide, it turns out that Eversource is actually kind of moving in the opposite direction, which surprised me when I looked at their environmental disclosure labels recently. I think back in 2018, they were at something like 23% renewable, and then in 2021, they were down to about 13%. So they've dropped about 10 percentage points over that 4-year period.
Is that because of increased demand?
I don't know.
Or have things gone offline?
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to kind of tease apart the reasons for that, but it is kind of a steady downward trend. Yeah. The second option here would be for Lyme residents to kind of take control of their power supply and choose a competitive electricity provider who would offer maybe a high renewable or 100% renewable product. And this opportunity to do this has been around for 20 years or so in New Hampshire, and I've never had a good sense for how many folks actually do this, but if any of you are on the listserv, you've probably seen that there's some chatter in recent weeks suggesting that there are some folks who actually have shopped around suppliers, and some of them at least seem to be contracting for buying high renewable content products.
My understanding is that it's a really low percentage.
Low percentage
that does that.
Yeah. The third option here would be for Lyme residents to install, you know, their own rooftop or ground-mount solar systems. This has been happening in town, and Lyme is actually one of the more advanced towns in New Hampshire in this regard. The last time I checked, the household penetration rate of residential solar in town was somewhere between, I don't know, 12 and 14%, somewhere in that area, which is, at least a year or two ago, put us at the very kind of the top of New Hampshire towns. And I think nationwide that's a pretty good penetration rate as well. So this is happening, but obviously it's a slow process, and you know, we still have 85% or so of households in Lyme do not have PB. And so that brings us to these last 2 bullets here. Group net metering of large ground-mounted PV, that's primarily what I'll talk about tonight. And then community power, which I don't know, Jim or Hebe or somebody will talk about. These are kind of the 2 ways, you know, catch-all ways that we could potentially push the town in this direction through tying into larger renewable energy projects, either locally or region-wide. So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of a visual as to what a large ground-mounted PV system might look like, because I know this has come up at some of the planning board meetings that I've been at. You know, there are questions about, you know, how far are the rows spaced apart, you know, how much acreage do the systems actually occupy once you spread them out. And so I looked around for some images and came up with this one, which is a recently installed PV system in Maine. This one is 3.9 megawatts of AC capacity, so it's roughly 4 megawatts. It sits on about 20 acres in total. The entire array is about 20 acres. And so one way of thinking of this project is it's roughly four times the size of what Kearsarge has proposed here at Lyme. The system was built by Revision Energy, which has a bit of a local presence here in town and has done a number of systems. Now,
I'm sorry, did you
Yeah.
say that the array is 20 acres or it's on 20 acres?
the array itself occupies about 20
Oh,
acres.
20 acres.
Yeah, including the spacing in between the rails.
Okay.
So the boundaries of all of those panels is about 20 acres?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
the fence line area, that's one way to think of
Okay.
it, yeah. Now, if you look at satellite imagery of the same project, you can see that it's divided up into 4 roughly equal quadrants of roughly equal area, which means that each of these kind of squares or rectangles here works out to about 1 megawatt in size, which happens to be the maximum non-municipal group net metering capacity limit in New Hampshire. So the maximum you can do is 1 megawatt. So that would correspond to roughly the size of this red square here. And so if we go back to the nice picture, here I've kind of scribbled in this red boundary around the portion of the array that works out to about 1 megawatt, just to give you a better sense for what that would look like. So if you can kind of, squint and visualize getting rid of the rest of the modules outside of the red boundary, this is what you're left with. And if you squint a little bit harder, when I looked at this picture, I was struck by how this could actually be the Bailey turkey farm we're looking at here, with kind of Route 10 right in front. These buildings could very, very easily be the Bailey turkey farm. You got the big field out front, which could certainly accommodate a large ground-mounted PV array.
Is that, would you guess, is about 5 acres or?
Probably because it's a quarter of
Quarter.
the system size, yeah. And so you might ask, how many households could a system of this size, of 1 megawatt system, support? And the answer is gonna be roughly between, I think, 100 and 200 households, and that range depends on whether you assume a household can get by with a 5 kilowatt system, which is a pretty good sized system and it'll meet a lot of your residential needs, or whether you think, whether you have an EV or heat pumps or something like that, and might think you need a 10 kilowatt system instead. So it's 100 households if you assume 10 kilowatts, it's 200 households if you assume 5 kilowatts. And so I guess the question becomes, how can Lyme residents, or how could Lyme residents benefit and tie into a system like this? And so that would occur through, one mechanism through which that could occur would be what's known as group net metering. It's a official program in New Hampshire. There was legislation passed a number of years ago to require it. And it's a pretty flexible program in New Hampshire, so there are a number of different ways you could structure it. And so I'm just gonna provide 2 examples here. The first one is what I will call a kind of a simple neighborhood type example, where a number of neighbors get together and sort of share the cost of the system and then also divide up its output. So the example that I've included on this slide is a group of 10 neighbors, who are also known as group members, get together, pool their capital, they build a 100 kilowatt PV system and divide the output equally. So in this case, each group member is getting 10 kilowatts. Once the system is built, or while the system is being built, the neighbor on whose property the system resides, who's known as the host, registers the PV system with the Public Utilities Commission and the utility as a group net metering system. And then once the system starts operating, every month the local utility, whether it's Eversource or the co-op, will basically send the host a check in compensation for the entire system's output. And then it's up to the host to take that check and divide it, in this case, equally among the 10 neighbors. And because, in this example, each of the 10 neighbors has invested in the system, they own a portion of the system, they're able to take the federal investment tax credit, which is a 30% tax credit. They're allowed to take that tax credit on their portion of the system. And then there are these things called renewable energy credits that I think most of you probably know what they are. Those stay with the system, and so the host and the group members can do whatever they want with those. They can sell them or they can retire them.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
So do they get a better buyback rate from Eversource than individuals that are net metering?
No, it's basically set up the same way. So in this case, if the system is, less than 100 kilowatts, so in this example, I was assuming 100 kilowatts, your compensation is basically the default energy service rate plus the full transmission rate plus a quarter of the distribution rate, which I think is the same for personal net metering at present.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know how much a 100 kilowatt system might cost? Is there any approximately?
So, I don't know, you could assume maybe, I don't know, $3 a watt, and so 3 times $100,000, $300,000, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, because I think we were saying that 1 megawatt was, between around 1.5 million maybe, something like that?
Yeah, 1.5 to 2 million, something like that,
1.5 to 2
maybe,
million,
yeah.
Is the federal investment tax credit a one-time credit?
Yeah, you basically claim it in the year that the system is put online.
Yep.
Okay, so that's kind of the simple neighborhood example, and that's one way that it could work in Lyme. The second way that it could work is what I'll call a commercial example. So this one would probably be for a larger system, one approaching, or equaling 1 megawatt of capacity maximum. And the way this one differs from the example that I just ran through is that in this case, the host is let's say a professional solar developer, or maybe a small business, or even a municipality. That host completely on its own finances, builds, and owns the solar plant. So in this case, the group members do not contribute any capital to the system. And in fact, the group members probably don't even need to pay any sort of subscription fee either. So really all they do is they lend their load to the system, which basically enables this transaction to occur. And so, for the host, having access to each group member's load is valuable because it basically allows them to secure this contract and secure this revenue stream. And so in compensation for subscribing, the group members basically get a bill credit. And that bill credit won't be as lucrative as if they were to, they won't get the full revenue that the system generates because they have to share that with the host in this case. So it's not as, the return won't be as high as it was for the neighborhood system, but on the other hand, in this example, they really haven't put up any capital to begin with. So it's kind of, you can think of it as free money. You're basically getting bill credits for not having paid anything up front. So there's a lot of fine print here. I'm not gonna go into that. I'm happy to send out these slides if anyone wants to.
Actually, if I can get you to email it to me,
Yeah.
then I can
Sure.
get it to anyone who wants it also.
Right.
And I think, this commercial model is probably what Kearsarge had in mind or has in mind. I think it's typically how these larger projects operate. And in general, I know Kearsarge was hoping to kind of minimize the number of group members. They wanted to go with, large municipal loads, and that just kind of eases the administrative burden. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can sign up a lot of residential customers if you'd like. So I just thought we'd take a quick look at what the revenue stream for these larger systems might look like. So if your system is over 100 kilowatts, then you're compensated at the default service energy rate. And so I went back and pulled the data from Eversource going back through 2010. So that's the red line that you see here. You can see that it's kind of oscillated around 10 cents per kilowatt hour over this 13-year period until the big price spike of summer of 2022, which we've all seen. In addition, the blue line here shows the history of New Hampshire rec prices, which have ranged between maybe 1 and 5 cents per kilowatt hour. If you combine the two, you get the dotted black line here, which ranges between 10 and 15 cents. And average is about 13 cents over this period. So, this is kind of what the compensation would have looked like historically. It's hard to know what it's gonna look like going forward, but, you know, you might assume that something between 10 and 15 cents could be possible going forward as well. And again, this is the revenue that the entire plant would earn, but then it would have to be divided up between the host and the group members. And you could do that several different ways. You could pay the host first, and then any upside above whatever share the host takes could go to the group members. Or you could kind of flip that on its head and pay the group members first, with the host taking any upside. So for example, you know, the host might take the first, let's say, 8 cents per kilowatt hour, and then anything above 8 cents would go to the group members. But, you know, one of the hallmarks of New Hampshire's program is that it's very flexible, and that means that you could really kind of structure this sharing agreement really any way that you like.
Another question.
Yeah.
So that formula that, for the net metering, I call it buyback rate or whatever, has that changed over the course of the time period you've given, like, cause that is like a political, question, right, what that's going to.
Yeah,
can
yeah,
change.
right, so initially net metering in New Hampshire was at the full retail rate, so whatever rate you were paying, that, you know, that's what your power was worth. And then I think around 2016 or 2017, they switched to this formula where they, you know, they eliminated some of the revenue that you would get and kind of dropped the distribution rate down to, I think, just a quarter of the distribution rate payment. So yeah, you're right, I mean, historically, the actual revenue you would have earned might have been a little bit different in this case, although I'm not showing the transmission and distribution here. Yeah, this chart's really just intended to kind of,
It was more just, you know, not questioning the chart, just
Yeah,
in
yeah.
general, that formula is something that's up to the
Yep.
lawmakers.
that's exactly right, and in fact, in New Hampshire, the net metering program is under review, and so, you know, there is some political risk going forward that, you know, the rates could change. Yes.
Oh, and just what's the New Hampshire REC price, the rec price, the definition of it?
Oh, yeah, so that's for the renewable energy credits.
Okay, all right.
Yep, okay, sure. So I guess the question, you know, maybe more relevant to the planning board here is where, you know, where these larger systems might be located. And so to address that, we can look to what are known as hosting capacity maps. Each utility is now required to post online what's known as a hosting capacity map, and it's basically a map it's a map of their transmission and distribution system that tells you, if you kind of click on any given point in the line, how much distributed generation capacity you could connect at any given point on their system. It also differentiates their single phase from their three-phase lines, which is potentially useful as well. And so what I'm showing here is a screenshot of Eversource's hosting capacity map. If you want to look yourself, the URL is right there. And basically what this map does is it differentiates between three-phase and single-phase by coloration. So the red lines that you see here show Eversource's three-phase system in Lyme. So it comes out East Thetford Road, goes out Dorchester Road towards the skiway, and then also moves south on Route 10. And then the gray lines, which are kind of hard to see, show Eversource's single-phase system. And then if you actually, if this were live, you could click on any point on their system, and it would tell you how much capacity you could interconnect without requiring a significant distribution system upgrade. And so I've done that, and what it says is that 200 kilowatts seems to be the max on their three-phase system, and then when you drop down to single phase, it goes to about 50 kilowatts.
How does this intersect or dovetail with New Hampshire Electric Co-ops?
I'll show you that in a sec.
Okay.
I would consider these numbers to be indicative and perhaps a little conservative. I mean, the utility, this is, you know, something that's public facing that they have to put out. So my guess is they're being a little conservative here probably, and you would definitely want to talk to the utility and, you know, find out what the real story is before you got too far along with any project. Yes, Tim?
There was some thought that there was three-phase up Baker Hill Road, but that's not.
That's
Not true.
the co-op. That's the co-op system. This is
Okay.
just Eversource we're looking at there. Yeah, yeah.
So, Mark,
Yeah.
sorry, their hosting capacity, is indicating then that they could only accept 200 kilowatts, so that's not even half a megawatt.
Yeah, and like I said,
You're
that's,
saying that that's likely conservative.
it's
and-
indicative, it may be conservative, that's my guess, I don't know that. But, right, and so I guess, what you're implying is, why was Kearsarge proposing a megawatt in that case? And the answer is, you can always pay to upgrade the distribution system.
Yeah.
You wanna avoid that if you can because it's costly, but, it can be done, and these, commercial developers do that all the time. So here's the co-op's hosting capacity map. It's a little bit clunkier than Eversource's, but it basically contains the same information. And what you find there is that the maximum hosting capacity is 112 kilowatts, which follows their three-phase system. And then once you drop down to single phase, it goes to 57 kilowatts.
Does that mean that only one 112 kilowatt thing could be attached to an arm? Or what, along what distance are they evaluating that capacity?
That's a really good question. I don't quite know the answer to that. I mean, I think it's like a snapshot in time, so that, basically what they're saying is, given everything that's on the system right now, we could accommodate this much. But what you're saying is, once someone puts a 100 kilowatt system on there, yeah, at that point, the co-op would have to kind of reevaluate and update their map, I guess, and, see what you could handle at that point. But yeah, that's-
Which color is three-phase?
Yeah, so the co-op map is a little bit different. The coloration doesn't really indicate three-phase versus single in this case. But let me just go to the next slide, because I did go through the co-op's hosting capacity map and figure out where their three-phase is. And so in this map, what I've done is I've kind of just scribbled in the three-phase, all of the three-phase in Lyme according to these hosting capacity maps. The red is Eversource's, and then the gold lines are for the co-op. So the co-op three-phase starts, or doesn't start, it might end actually, up where Pinnacle intersects High Bridge, continues along High Bridge to Acorn Hill Road, comes down to Dorchester Road, out to the skiway, and then it also goes up Baker Hill Road, down to Goose Pond Road, where it heads towards Goose Pond in Hanover. So, as far as I can tell, this is the three-phase that's in Lyme. And if I keep moving along here, we can kind of combine that last map that I showed with a map of conserved land in town that I pulled from the state's GIS clearinghouse, which is called NH Granite without the E for whatever reason. So they've got a layer that shows all public and conserved land. You can see there's a lot of it here in Lyme. Note that I've not tried to verify the accuracy of this. I don't have any reason to believe it's not accurate, but I did
It's
not.
not.
It's not? How bad is it?
It's shifted, so it basically,
Oh, I see.
if you overlay it with,
Okay.
like the tax map, or even looking at some of the aerial photography, you'll find that it's been shifted and it doesn't match up.
Yeah. Is it a
very
big
well.
shift or just kind of?
It depends on where you are, it's not a single shift.
But is the rough area right, or is it,
The rough area is right,
Okay.
it's just that trying to line it up with the real world
Yeah.
doesn't work well.
Okay, well, that might have
When
some
they say
very
conserved land, do they mean land that's in conservation easement?
conservation easements, and then I think also like public land, whatever that means is also.
And you'll see that the Lyme Town Forest is shown.
Yeah.
This is federal land.
So that's,
And federal land, yes, because you have the whole corridor of the
Appalachian
Oh, the
Trail.
18.
Appalachian Trail.
Yeah. Okay, so, all right, well, if this isn't completely accurate, that might color what I'm about to show you a little bit here, but, so what I did is I just took kind of a first cut pass at sort of overlaying the three-phase map with the public, or the conserved land map, just to get a sense for, where in Lyme you might be able to accommodate some of these larger ground-mounted systems. And in doing this, I kind of stuck to three simple criteria. I focused on land that was already cleared, so I was looking for fields, not forests, where there was not a conservation easement, and it had to be near three-phase lines. It just so happened that all of the sites that I identified are in the rural district, which I think is consistent with the proposed zoning amendment. A few of them are along Acorn Hill Road, which I believe is a designated scenic road. And I think the latest version of the zoning amendment had a restriction on that, right? Or,
On what, on designated
Yeah.
scenic roads?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only that you couldn't upgrade the electric infrastructure. If what was,
Yeah, if what was there,
if what was there would suffice, then.
Oh, okay, all right.
that's the way it was written.
Yeah, yeah, oh, good, I didn't realize that.
And they added the skiway district too, so.
Okay. So when I ran through this, I just wanna state for the record, I did not make any attempt to kind of identify the parcel owners, or their predilection towards solar, so if I happen to identify a parcel that any of you own, please don't be alarmed or, get excited or defensive or anything. This is really just kind of a high, first cut, high level prospecting exercise. I also didn't take into account any potential zoning restrictions such as lot coverage limitations, the presence of agricultural soils or anything like that. So this is, a very high level first approximation. So that, I thought we'd just jump right in here. So this is kind of the Eversource system heading into, along East Stepford Road into Lyme Village, out Dorchester Road, and then also Route 10 south a little bit. So the red line is Eversource's three-phase system. The green blobs there show the conserved land, and then I've dropped a number of gold suns into various fields or open land that seem like they could potentially accommodate solar.
So just one thing, Vicky, you gave us a thing to watch from Revision sometime back, and a talk by, I'm sorry, I forget the woman's name, but I called her up and spoke to her, and one of the things I spoke to her about was, what is the story with conserved land? And she said it really depends, you can't make a blanket assumption.
Yeah.
Some oversight entities will allow things and others won't, so it's really kind of a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, so it depends on who holds
Who
the
holds,
easement.
right.
Yeah,
Well, and also, there's a variety of different types of conservation easements.
Exactly.
yeah.
Some of them would bear on your ability to build something like a solar system, and some might permit that.
Yeah, yeah. Right, which just means that I guess, the number of sites I've identified here might be conservative from that perspective. Because what you're saying is, you could potentially build here, for example, or whatever.
Depending.
Yeah. So in some cases, I did go to the tax map to try to pull out the acreage of each parcel. So for example, here, these fields are not 52 acres, but the parcel they sit on is. And that may have some bearing on, whatever, the 25% ag soil limitation or whatever. So you can see there's, a number of sites here. The gravel pit's 10 acres, the Bailey Turkey Farm, 86 acres. Could presumably accommodate the system. If you head further south on Route 10, we got the Nichols Christmas Tree Farm here, which is obviously a working farm, but, will it always be? I don't know. I mean, you could put solar there if you wanted to. And then here's the 93-acre parcel that is under consideration as well. And then if you move further south on Route 10 towards the Hanover border, there are a couple of fields down there. Strangely enough, the three-phase actually runs in Hughes Lane and cuts through the woods over to the Hidden Valley Conservation Area and heads down to River Road for some reason. And there are a couple of fields apparently tucked back in there that could potentially accommodate solar and interconnect the three-phase. If we switch to New Hampshire Electric Cooperative System, I started up at the High Bridge Pinnacle intersection and moved south, and the first thing I really noticed was at the intersection of Franklin Hill and Acorn Hill. So this is Franklin Hill Road right here. So this is kind of the Lucky Star stables up there. And there are two sites there, and I just wanted to point out this one because this 60-acre parcel, I think has a Franklin Hill address, but it would presumably interconnect on the Acorn Hill side. But maybe this is moot, given that you said that as long as it doesn't have to upgrade the system, it's okay. Given that it's a scenic road, is that, that would be okay?
That's where it was when we left it.
Okay, perfect. So that's really not an issue. Just continuing along down Acorn Hill Road, this is where Pout Pond Lane goes off, so there are a couple fields up here, although there may be a house in this one now, which leads me to mention here that the aerial photography here is now a couple years old, I think, so this is a little bit out of date. As you get closer to Lyme Center, there are a couple fields down here that I believe are technically outside of the Lyme Center district, and so could potentially qualify as well. Then heading up Baker Hill Road, this is where Isaac Perkins splits off from Baker Hill, and I believe the line actually follows Isaac Perkins. And there are a number of open fields up top there. If we head further south, this is where Isaac Perkins comes back in. Again, there's a fair amount of cleared land up there near 3-phase. And then finally, we get down here to Goose Pond Road. This is where Bliss Lane goes off right here, and there are a couple of fields there that could potentially accommodate solar as well. So that's just, like I said, a really rough first cut at identifying sites that could be suitable for larger ground mounted systems. There do appear to be quite a lot, but obviously, not everyone's going to want to build these on their land. There could be agricultural soil restrictions. There could be any number of reasons why these sites are actually not suitable. As I mentioned, I did consider only cleared land, not forested land. But I know this question of the tension between cutting trees in order to build solar has come up a couple times in planning board meetings, so I thought I'd just throw out some calculations here that Mike Novello on the Energy Committee was able to help me with. And I'm not gonna walk you through these. Again, you can kind of spend time with this on your own if you want. But basically, if you run through these numbers, which are based on a few assumptions that come from pretty reputable sources such as ISO New England and the EPA. What you find here is down in number 6 that an acre of solar PV provides about 47 times the carbon dioxide benefit of an acre of average forest. Now that number would shrink if you were to burn the trees that you had just cleared to put PV in. But even so, I saw one calculation suggesting that even if you released all the carbon that's stored in the forest, it would only take the PV system maybe a year or two to kind of make that back. This number also does not include the energy or greenhouse gases that are embodied in manufacturing the PV system. But that has also been studied quite a bit, and life cycle analyses of PV systems typically show that the energy payback period is maybe between 1 and 3 years. So again, it's pretty low, given that these systems are expected to last maybe 35, 40 years.
So, but it doesn't include sourcing and transportation or getting rid of it at the end of the life.
Well, the energy payback period would include that. These life cycle analyses are like cradle.
Include all of those?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And then, Mike and I kind of did our own calculations here, but down at the bottom I included some links that I found online to other studies which all seem to find, not the same exact answer, but similar answers, kind of skewing the comparison in favor of solar. And so, just the basic message I want to take away here is, none of us want to clear cut trees to put solar up, but we shouldn't be afraid of losing a few trees, given the way the carbon balance seems to be coming out here.
Does the carbon that's in a forest though, is that like a static amount, or does it continue to sequester carbon over time?
Yeah. So this was this 47 number was kind of an annual number. So it's each year how much CO2 does a PV system displace versus how much carbon a forest would store. Now these numbers are going to change over time. Depending on how large the trees are, what type of trees they are, that type of thing as well.
And
So,
is that also in that calculation, is that the carbon that, when you say that a solar system is displacing, is that because people aren't using other means of getting electricity?
That's because basically the power system mix that you'd be displacing or offsetting Like if you consume,
Which will also change over time as
Exactly,
we use
yeah.
less of that, right?
yeah, so as the grid gets greener and greener, you're not gonna be displacing as much carbon.
So you're assuming the solar is replacing coal or something?
So I wasn't gonna get into these numbers, and I won't.
Yeah, I just wanted to like,
But,
cause I wanted to understand.
So the assumption that James is raising is this first one here. ISO New England basically calculated that in 2020, which is the latest number they've reported, the marginal emissions rate of the New England power mix was 706 pounds of carbon dioxide for each megawatt hour that's generated. But 10 years from now, that might be 200, it may go way down. So the other thing I didn't take into account when kind of doing this high-level site prospecting was the possibility that there might be ag soils here, and obviously in Lyme, we all appreciate the farms and the open farmland, and we've codified that appreciation in terms of placing development restrictions on land that contains ag soils. But I think we also need to keep in mind that farmers, throughout New England, not just here in Lyme, but pretty much everywhere, are struggling to make farming work and to keep their farms alive. And this is one area where solar could potentially help. And so I guess I just wanted to throw out for planning board consideration the possibility of, if it becomes a constraint, maybe relaxing restrictions on ag soils when it comes to solar, particularly solar on working farms. And I've listed 5 reasons here why you might consider that. First one being, these systems aren't permanent. They'll last 25 to 40 years, but you can always pull them out at the end. It's easy to dismantle these systems and haul them away. During the system life, during that 25 to 40 year period, the field is lying fallow, it's regenerating, that can improve the soil, it can also sequester carbon. The farmers could obviously potentially use some help in reducing their operating costs, particularly given the current electricity price spike, and I'm sure a little bit of extra income would be welcome as well. These farm fields are already open. There's really no trees that need to be cleared in this case, which means that we don't have that trees versus solar conflict. And it also means that the wildlife impact is perhaps a little bit limited. And then the 5th one here, obviously, if we could put some solar on some of these farmers' fields, that would help move us towards our 2030 goal. There are also currently quite a few incentives for farm-based PV. There's the federal investment tax credit, which thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act can now be sold for cash. So even if the farmer does not have sufficient tax liability to use the credit efficiently as a tax credit, they can sell it in exchange for cash. There's also a USDA Rural Energy for America program, which provides grants to farmers and rural small businesses who install or that install renewable energy systems. And that program is now flush with money, again, from the Inflation Reduction Act. They have roughly, I think, 5 times the amount of money that they had prior to the IRA, and so they're looking to get money out the door, and they've doubled the maximum size of their grants to $1 million or 40% of total costs. So you could combine these 2 incentives to basically cover 70% of the upfront system cost. So I think there's some good reasons to look into putting PV on farms. And so in terms of takeaways, I think group net metering could be one way that Lyme could progress towards this 2030 goal, while also potentially offering bill savings to Lymies who don't already have solar. I ran through the 2 models, the neighborhood model, the commercial model. They have different kind of revenue profiles. The neighborhood model really kind of mirrors the type of revenue or financial situation that you would get if you were to install your own system on your own rooftop. Whereas the commercial model is a little bit different. There's kind of no cash up front, and you get a little bit of bill savings. And so that model may be appropriate for folks who don't feel like they have the capital to invest up front in a PV system. The site ID mapping exercise can certainly be refined with additional filtering, some potential Layers we could add would be tax maps, slope maps, topography maps, ag soils, taking into account existing lot coverage. And then, again, just, I don't think we need to be afraid to take down a few trees to enable solar as needed, if it comes to that. And then this is my last slide, but I jotted down a few possible to-dos for each of the three committees. Feel free to add to these. I think it'd be great if the planning board could kind of pick up this mapping effort and move it along, depending on whatever additional layers you think make sense.
I think, David, you were.
Yeah, I had actually been searching for the three-phase power map, so now that I know where to get that, that's,
Yep.
and I have, maps of, I basically went through, pulled out areas that had south-facing slopes that were, not in, any conservation districts and were 5 acres or greater.
Okay.
So I have, a map of,
Yeah,
stuff like that, that I can refine I didn't like the slope map that much, because if you have a slope that's slightly facing north, it wouldn't have been included.
right.
And whereas you can make up that with elevation on the panels.
Yeah.
So I need to refine that, but yeah, the mapping's not a problem.
Okay, great. I mentioned the possibility of, relaxing ag soil restrictions if they become binding for certain systems, particularly those that might be on working farms. One notion that came,
Could I just add,
Yeah.
on the ag soil, having just gone through this, I know we're talking about large ground mounted systems, but even for folks who could afford, say, a tracker, the ag soil, which is on land that's not farmable, I mean, we've got ag soils everywhere in Lyme, and meeting that 25% either takes some interesting geometry to draw that narrow section where my tracker now sits. I think I don't know how many people might run into that, but it does seem to be a distinction that the planning board might consider.
okay, thanks, Jim. One of the meetings, I think the idea of looking into creating maybe solar districts or a solar zone came up.
That was the idea of sort of having a floating, instead of a geographical district, a floating zone or district that met common criteria.
Okay.
Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, I guess, I know the concept came up at a meeting, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, and I wasn't quite sure what, exactly what it involved.
That's sort of.
Yeah, okay, well, anyway, maybe that's something that would come out of the mapping effort, I'm not sure. But, just thought I'd throw it up there. And then, I think it'd be great if the planning board could continue to share information about any of these proposed larger projects that come along. I've tried to come to some of the planning board meetings and feel like I've learned a lot about what's happening by doing that, but at the same time, I'm not seeing the same materials that you guys all get in advance of the meeting, and so it's a little hard to keep up sometimes with what's going on.
David, could you just make sure he gets them?
Yeah, that'd be great. As far as the Energy Committee, I think, we haven't really discussed this internally, but I think it would be potentially useful to maybe talk to some farmers about solar and all the incentives that are out there right now, and perhaps offer some, pro bono technical assistance to help them apply for some of these grants. And then the Aggregation Committee, we haven't heard from them yet, but, they obviously have a lot of work to do still to kind of move us towards a potential warrant article at next year's town meeting, figuring out whether community power makes sense for Lyme. And as part of that process, I think they will probably be gathering data on electricity consumption for Lyme residents. I think that would be really helpful in terms of providing an indication of how much capacity we're actually talking about that we would need to cover all that consumption. And then this last bullet here, I think I brought up before how community power and group net metering can potentially be in conflict, or maybe a better way to say it is they kind of complement each other. And so I think, we could all think a little bit about how those two things can work together, or whether they're, at odds versus, helping each other out, and kind of, what the right mix should be, I guess, in that
So,
case.
yeah, I have a question. So what I recall as a potential problem was you needed a certain amount of buy-in for a town system. And that, in the case of Kearsarge, you were, at the time anyway, you were concerned that they could pull away needed members.
Yeah, I guess the idea there is if, you know, if community power goes through and everybody in town signs up for a 100% renewable product, then, you know, you don't need any PV in town to cover all of your load. And, you know, the opposite is true as well. If we have large group net metered systems and enough people sign up there, then there's potentially not as much need for community power.
So it goes both ways.
Yeah, and so I guess, you know, finding the right mix there, I think is, yeah, Jim.
I think just to clear that up, and one of the goals in particular, so their municipal aggregation would be somewhat different than us joining Community Power Coalition in New Hampshire. But one of the goals, Community Power Coalition in New Hampshire now has 28 member towns and a county. They've got 2 more that will probably get approved in March at their board meeting. 10 of those are ready to launch. They're in the next month, they're actually ready to start buying electricity. One of their goals is to support these kinds of large ground mount projects. So if Lyme joined Community Power Coalition as a member town, we could buy electricity for our town from, and I'll just use the Kearsarge name as an example of a large ground mount. We could purchase electricity from them. We could also, the Community Power Coalition would buy it from them, and so it would stay within New Hampshire. So I don't think they're certainly not at odds with one another, as far as I can tell. And I
Well,
just,
with if I remember correctly, Kearsarge didn't seem very interested in accommodating that.
so that would be then, you know, a commercial supplier would
Yeah.
obviously decide where he, or, you know, it would get the best price. I'm just saying that community power by itself doesn't contradict having these large ground mounts, and certainly if it was something that the town decided to do. I think the other thing, Community Power Coalition is trying to build up a reserve, and one of the things they want to do with that reserve is to secure loans for towns that want to do large ground mount systems.
So that would be helpful.
So that would be helpful, and they talked, and I'm not a bond person, but they talked about some of the advantages that they have as a nonprofit agency to help us, for instance, Lyme, if we decided to put one of these things in, get a better bond, better loan rates, those kinds of things. So I think we can move ahead thinking that we're all in this for the same purpose.
Great, and,
I just had a question, maybe more of a comment. My understanding is that anybody in Lyme now who is using Eversource could call Direct Energy tomorrow and sign up for 100% green electricity. And that rate would be, for a 24-month period, that rate would be 15.89 cents. Now, the cheapest rate that Direct Energy has is 12.99 cents as of right now.
That who has?
Direct Energy, for 21 months. And there were 32 Lyme residents that signed up in the past 7 days for that 12.99 cents. But I guess what I'm thinking is that if we could somehow get everyone in Lyme that was on Eversource, which is, I guess, more than half the town, they could sign up for 100% green energy.
Unless you've already sold your RECs to somebody else, you have to maintain a relationship with Eversource.
What?
That's the rub, is that I have a solar installation on my roof, and I need to maintain my relationship with Eversource
So you
in order
can't
to continue to
get
get
paid
net
for your
metered.
electricity?
Yes.
Okay, but if you don't, if somebody doesn't have solar.
Right, I know, but you
And
know,
the-
it's like, it's kind of a kick,
Right.
isn't it?
So that, right, well, and the difference between the electricity from non-100% green is about 3 cents. So assuming that there's 600, the average use is 600 kilowatts an hour, a month for the average household, that would be about $18 a month that you'd have to pay extra to have 100% green.
So you'd be paying a premium to have.
So you'd be paying a premium,
But
but
it's not that.
and then I wondered, you know, if for people that maybe couldn't or didn't feel that they could afford the extra $18 a month, we could maybe do some funding or something along to help people out doing that.
But you'd still be saving a huge amount on, over Eversource.
Over Eversource, yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out, because I looked it up today on the internet, and it's all right there. You could just, you know, you could go tomorrow, sign up for this.
That's really
For
helpful.
100% green.
So maybe, this might be a good point to start talking about the community power.
Yeah, no, I agree, I'm done.
But there was a question over here.
Yeah, sorry, forgive my ignorance on a couple of things. One, in the goal for the town by 2030, how is the carbon calculation done? I mean, is it in real time, or is it just averaged over a year?
Yeah, I don't think it's, well, first of all, I don't think any of us really put all that much thought into it. It was just, 100%, and I think by default, it's probably just averaged over the course of
Yeah.
the year. It's not a 24/7 thing.
Because I think one thing to think about, especially since it's involved actually putting commercial, like this is a real business, as if somebody puts in a 0.5 megawatt system, is to ask, well, where are we gonna be in 10 years? Because if the goal of people in Lyme is to actually reduce their carbon footprint, I think we're gonna find out that the vast majority of that electrical carbon footprint is found in the winter months and at night. And our system will not stop any of that at all. And so I think without a little more look at the depth of what the carbon accounting really would be now, and then projecting forward 10 years, and then projecting forward 20 years, it'll be hard for residents to really know what that carbon reduction would be. So that's one thing that, I think the second thing is, because we actually have a very low penetration of residential solar, it's worth thinking like, well, why is that? And there's real advantages of having it distributed over centralized in some respects. The third thing is, at least in the New Hampshire Electric Co-op, they've been working a lot on transactive energy, and they've been running real experiments in homes where, my neighbor Eric Furstenberg and Emily Blanchard, they can produce power, and if it's excess, I could actually buy it. So it's done through blockchain and all that. And it's very, very early days, but 10 years from now, it won't be early days anymore. So I'm just sort of thinking, and I'm just speaking out loud, really. I'm not questioning anything that's been presented. But it feels like we need to think about what's going to be going on in 10 years and 15 years, because these are relatively long-term commitments. And then the last thing I would say, just always waving the flag of the work I've done, is that the average Lyme residence uses 600 kilowatt hours a month. We use around 120. And energy efficiency is by far the cheapest way to save electricity. So what, if anything, can we do within the town to say, and I actually did work with New Hampshire Electric Co-op last year on their own carbon footprint. And it's really the co-op members that have the most control over their carbon footprint, because they can make their buildings more efficient. So I only put those out there right now because I think there's a tendency to want to go to a silver bullet, like, okay, we'll put in X megawatts and then we'll be square. But I'm not sure the real accounting of the carbon will turn out to be that way, and I'm not sure it's going to be the cheapest way to do it. It might be the easiest, but it may not be the cheapest.
Great,
Mark,
thank you.
Before we leave and you and talk to the committee, one of the things you first said is, I think the maximum system size that you can build in New Hampshire is 1 megawatt.
That's just for private group net metering, non-municipal group net metering. If, for municipal, you can go up to 5 megawatts. And then if it's commercial, you can go up to, the sky's the limit.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
First of all, thank you, that was great.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
did the LEAC
I'd be
wanna
happy to talk
get
about it.
going?
Yes,
James is-
so basically, Lyme Energy Aggregation Committee, of which we are the three of us right now, and possibly another member soon. It might be best just to give a quick thing about what it is. So we talked about how your electric bill, you have a supplier, and you can go and get Direct Energy to be your supplier as opposed to Eversource. The idea of the electrical aggregation in New Hampshire is for communities to buy, to pick their supplier in a bulk way, and provide the electricity to the town. Now, towns can do this on their own. We could develop an electrical aggregation plan and present it to the Public Utilities Commission, and we could go out on the open market and try to, buy cheap power from the supplier of our choice. But that would be a lot of work, and needs a lot of expertise. So, the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire was formed to help towns and municipalities to do this in even a bigger way. So what we've proposed is to join the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. If we do that, we then would have to put together an electrical aggregation plan with their help, and that would provide all the information that Mark was mentioning before about how much electricity are we using, when. I don't know all the details. It's pretty dense stuff, but that's something that the CPCNH can help us to develop this plan. They can help us get the data from the utilities, things like that. Once we have this plan in place, that's the plan that the town would vote on next year. Where we would say, like, here's our plan to be a community power aggregation. We present that to the town meeting, and the town would vote whether Lyme would form an electrical aggregation.
Would that be a specific plan or a general sort of thing?
I think it's pretty specific about, but I can't speak much to it unless you or Jim can, because it's very technical, and it's something that we haven't learned about yet, but I think it's basically the plan that presents how much electricity we use and where it's used, and then, did you have something to say?
Well, the plan basically lays out how you're going to buy electricity, who's gonna make those decisions. And one of the advantages, I think, so far, of the Community Power Coalition is that they have hired people who work in the energy market. And as opposed to Eversource or the co-op or even some of these commercial suppliers that sign up for 21 months or 2 years or 3 years. So you may think you have a good deal now, but in 3 years, is the price going up or is it going down? They will monitor this, it's sort of like the stock market. They're the people that do it daily, weekly, etc. So you're hoping, the goal is to provide equal to or lower than whatever Eversource and the co-op is providing. And also to give you the option of getting a bigger percentage from clean renewables. And that's their focus. So I think, you know, the advantage for us right now is we get their technical assistance in developing this plan, and then communicating it to the town. The other thing I think is important to remember, is that this is an opt-out program. So if the town voted next March, 2024, you would, everybody in this room, all the people who have electric bills, would get a letter saying, do you wanna stay in or do you wanna stay out? And you could stay with Eversource, you would just simply call the number or go to the portal and say, I don't wanna be part of this. You would go to Direct Energy if you decided you wanted to stay with them. So it's, you know, and you can opt out of this at any time.
Right, so it's a little ahead of
Oh, sorry.
where I was in terms of just the, you know, that all comes after, you know, if the town votes to form an aggregation committee, then we would work with CPCNH. We'd be working with CPCNH to develop this plan. Be presented to the town, we'd be educating the town over the next year about what this is gonna mean as we ourselves get educated on it.
Yeah, I think the CPCNH provides kind of the administrative and legal framework that's all been worked out. So we would be able to tap into their expertise without us having to really get into the weeds about the language.
As well as we're part of a much bigger group in terms of our
And they also
ability
have
to buy power.
the mechanisms for getting the data about what the town actually uses, the citizens use for electrical power, and then broad guidelines about how to analyze it and what numbers you need to look for to actually plug into the plan.
And- Go
So-
ahead. Oh, go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I think, to follow up on the question that I think you were asking, John, is at the next town meeting, I presume you're gonna come forward with some recommendation, and that will be, should the town buy into, contract with the CPCNH under these terms?
No, so we would have to, contract, we've already presented to the select board.
Right, yes,
Uh,
right, I know that, right.
Right, so that would make us, if we sign up with CPCNH now, we would become a member. And that would allow us, you know, access to their
Sure,
resources.
right.
And using their resources, we would develop an electrical aggregation plan, which is necessary to form an electrical aggregation. We have that plan, then the town decides en masse whether we want to do this, right?
So you come up with the plan, and then next March, a year from now,
The town decides.
the
whether
town
they want
decides,
to.
is this the plan we want to embrace
Right.
or not?
Right.
Yeah,
And then-
okay, all right, that's,
And generally speaking, with CPCNH, the towns have, that are members now, have created plans. And then the next step is whether they get into a cost-sharing agreement with CPCNH, which is actually the agreement where you're gonna buy the power.
Mhm.
So we could be a member, we could form an aggregation, but we don't have to start buying our power, we can do that when we want. You know, it's decided every year. And right now, what the member towns are involved with is that first purchase of power. And apparently, though we haven't got all the data yet, they're offering, you know, several levels of renewable, that you can get into. Go ahead.
So, I assume CPCNH could buy all, renewable if they
Yes.
wanted to, so wouldn't they do that? Would they just automatically buy all renewable?
Yeah, but there's, what they're trying to, use price as the driver, primarily, because they wanna undersell, I mean, this is what my opinion is, undersell Eversource
Right,
to
so
get people on board.
Right, so more people will sign up.
Right, so, you know, but I think that, I did see in the, paper, you've probably seen, there's been some press about it and letters, to the editor. I think there's an offering, like 26% renewable, 33%, 50%, and 100%.
Right.
Which surprised me that there were that many, you know, it was
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that many choices, but, I don't know if that's exactly right, but I do think that their, intent is to, you know, let people choose 100% if they can.
Right.
There was a question over here.
I mean, I have a question, a point. It feels to me like it's, I mean, Boulder, Colorado started down this road over 10 years ago. And that was promulgated by really their disgruntlement with Xcel Energy. And Xcel at that time having a pretty heavy coal-laden system out in Colorado and not changing very fast. And so the city has chosen to say, and then it's pretty big and pretty sophisticated city, they're gonna force the carbon question on the grid and they're gonna negotiate at the same time. I think we have to think about what are we really gonna get out of this. For example, New Hampshire Electric Co-op is a nonprofit. It's gonna be hard to beat their prices. They're aggregating a lot of power already. What we could do is, you know, work with people to say, well, this is a cheaper way to get to a high percentage of carbon reduction or something like that. But we're a little tiny town and we'll benefit from the coalition's purchasing power. But I think we have to really think about what we're gonna get. And at least my experience, and I think you said it correctly, is that ultimately you have to have a contract, and it's, like electrical contracts are serious things that really require experts to get into the details.
Right.
And understanding kind of what you're gonna be exposed to in terms of price volatility or carbon footprint over time would be important. And I'm not being negative about the coalition.
No,
I
no,
like
those
the
are
idea of
important things,
aggregating.
sure.
Yeah,
But
we know we can't do it ourselves, so.
How do we, you know,
Tapping
and
into
you
the
want help,
expertise.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But there may be other ways to reduce carbon too that, that we ought to make sure we're aware of as well.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
The plan, which is presented to the town and the town votes on,
Mhm.
the elements of that plan that you're making your choice about are presumably the price and where the electricity comes from.
No,
No.
not at that.
What is it
point.
that you're voting on then? What are the features of the plan that you make a decision?
I think you know, let me just say that, when we get to that point, right, we're learning about this now, this is new, and I can't tell you like what's gonna be in the plan, or I can tell you that the plan requires us to know like how much energy we use, where it comes from, all that. It probably, you know, includes things like Jim was saying about, you know, how we would administer this thing, but we don't know. That's what we're gonna look to CPC&H to help us with if we can join up with them. If we can't join up with CPC&H or some other group that can provide us resources and expertise, this isn't gonna happen in Lyme, right?
But I do think it's like gonna be a couple-step process where the first vote will be, hey, should we become a community that aggregates our electrical power?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the main question.
And that would be step one. If the majority of the town of Harvard vote goes yes, then there's definitely gonna be at least one more step, which is, and here's a contractual agreement that we've been able to create that will benefit people with these benefits, and people can sign up or not, or opt out or not. But I mean, I guess it's gonna even be 3 or 4 steps, where each step down the road, you have to go back to the members of the coalition, the aggregation group, which is us, and say, this is what we've now learned, shall we move forward to the next step?
But the town's goal is not to get the cheapest electricity possible. It is to get to 100% renewable.
Right,
So that's a different goal.
yes, that's right.
It could be
But-
the same, though.
It could be
But-
the same, but it would be nice to have them tied together
Right.
right at the beginning.
This gives you a greater opportunity to get to renewable. Right now, you're talking about, let's call up everybody in town and get them to sign up for renewable. This is a way of saying, we're all doing this, and you can choose whether you want, 20, 50, or 100%. But, or you can choose to just keep getting natural gas energy from Eversource too. But this would allow us as a community to work in that direction.
I mean, I think what happened out in Boulder is they weren't allowed to do this, and then
Right.
laws got passed that allowed them to say, we can be our own power entity. Up until that time, it was illegal to do that.
And that's what happened in New Hampshire,
Yeah.
basically.
It allows you to become a power.
2019 is when
Yeah.
this law came into
And-
effect,
and
and
this is
the first year
first
for
year.
it, because the Public Utilities Commission had been dragging their feet on making the rules.
So we expect to learn a lot from
Right.
the towns that are actually trying to implement it this spring.
And I think the town can write in its own aggregation language that the role of the aggregation is to promote the adoption of green energy at whatever caveats you wanna put on that, lowest cost possible, highest percentage, something, and that you're essentially asking that entity to go out and execute
for
in a way that if you ask
example-
Eversource, they'll say, haha, right, see you, bye.
Our committee could decide in our, cost sharing agreement, I'm assuming, though we don't know all this information. We could say, hey, for Lyme, we just want to get in a cost sharing agreement of 100% renewable energy for this cost, and that's what it's gonna be for everybody, right? But the reality is, not everybody, not everybody's, on that page, not everybody wants to, cares about 100% renewable energy, that's just a fact, right? So some people are gonna say, I don't wanna get on that, but I see the community power as a way of moving us in that direction quicker, and it also provides, in the future, other sources coming onto the grid, us to tap into other sources coming onto the grid, because right now, the only power I can get, I gotta get my stuff from Eversource, and unless I call up and get it from Direct Energy, which I do, but I'm gonna be using fossil fuel, right? So, I think that, this is a great opportunity for a lot of towns in New Hampshire to force the issue, like you're saying they did in Boulder. We're saying,
And-
we wanna get off the carbon train,
And Lyme has, put tax credits in for people who put in solar on their individual houses, but that also tends to favor people who can afford to do it, so
Right, so
this
this is a way,
aggregation would
yeah.
be, allow people of lower means to
Or
tap
who
into.
can't have solar on their
Exactly.
houses, yeah, right?
Or just aren't physically in the
Have a way
right
to do
position,
Mhm.
north facing slope.
I think it's probably important to separate this fact-finding piece from the March 2024 town meeting. One of the reasons we're asking the select board to sign this joint powers agreement, which is, it's no commitment on our part, but it lets us tap into their technical expertise. If we decide that joining CPCNH is the best avenue as opposed to Lyme doing its own aggregation, I think, at the town meeting, one of the things you'll vote for is, how does CPCNH do risk management? Who makes those decisions? They have a board now that's 28 members, but it's gonna go down next March to, I think, 12, somewhere around 12, elected by the member towns. So you'll have an idea. One of their goals is to build up, accrue some reserve so that you can outlast the spikes. If the energy goes up for whatever reason, another war, et cetera, they've got some capital, certainly not in the first year, but maybe in the third, fourth, fifth year. So I think there's some advantages that we'll be looking at. The other thing that the law requires is at least 2 public hearings on this before you get to town meeting. So there are gonna be one of our jobs is to educate the town. one of the town's jobs, is to come to those public hearings and ask all the pointed questions. So, you know, I think, right now, we feel good about the path we're on. Whether we end up being an actual member, and doing the cost sharing, which is the final commitment, we'll see.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to talk about was that, sort of that conflict of the, because that was a question, like, I guess, you know, if you have solar on your house now, I don't know if you can use direct energy or not and get net metering. I don't know if that's an option,
No,
you know.
it's not an option.
Are there any other suppliers you can use, or does it have to be Eversource? Do you know?
I was just looking to see if I could transfer my credits, and, it didn't on the Eversource, and
So-
they didn't really say that you could.
Right, so I think, given the towns that are involved in CPCNH, I do think that net metering is still gonna be possible. It's not like if we start, you know, getting our supply from, through CPCNH, that all of a sudden you're not gonna have net metering, because that would really go against, you know, the whole gist of what they're set up for. And the town, you know, like Hanover has tons of net metering, and, you know, they're a major player in
Yeah,
the coalition, so.
It's kind of for people that never had a plug-in car, and now you need additional, and you're stuck with Eversource, you know, and with limited opportunity to expand the solar that I have on my property, so I kind of feel like I made a premature decision.
You mean having the solar panels?
Having the solar panels and not expecting, I also changed from a, gas stove to an electric one, and induction is like, it gobbles a lot of energy.
And that locks you in, you're locked?
Well, I don't have, I mean, unless they put more solar on so that I have more capacity on my own, but I have to keep my relationship with Eversource, and I can't, I mean, I could just say, oh, I don't want a net meter anymore, and then figure out a way maybe to store my own power by getting a wall and storing it and just using it, you know, doing something very different. But, you know, it's, the whole world has changed quite a bit since I put in my,
You know, and that's one of the things are changing so fast,
Yeah.
and there's so
Yeah.
many moving parts, it's a real challenge.
I think that, you know, your point earlier about looking 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, where are we going to be, is a good one. And one of the things CPCNH has done is hired, they're actually doing it as an advisory basis, but people that work in the energy fields that are advising them, people who work in the technical fields that are advising them on how to analyze this stuff. So, you know, right now, just with the members they have, I think it's plus the 2 that will join, so 30-member towns, they represent 20% of all the electric customers in the state of New Hampshire. So that's some significant buying power, I would think. So,
And in terms of cloud, of like, you know, in the future, upgrading the grid, you know, getting more three-phase power in other areas, you know, if we have like, this coalition is starting to have some clout, it might, you know, bode well in the future, for getting the infrastructure that we need. The other thing that comes to mind is, and I don't know how much, you know, how detailed the information that we'll end up getting from the utilities about our electrical use, but there might be ways that we can help people who are using like more electricity than maybe they should be. We might be able to say like, hey, you know, if we, you know, they're gonna be getting their power through the coalition, you know, we might be able to say like, wow, you have a little house and you're using all this power, you know, maybe we can help you use less, you know, which comes back to the whole idea of.
This might slightly muddy the waters, but the IRA is just coming up with rules over this year for an electrical efficiency thing. But one of the things that, and the impacts I think that will have, is that a whole lot of people that are using hot water systems that use oil and propane will be switching to mini splits, which will have a great effect as far as the use of carbon for the heating systems, but will have an increase effect on the use of electricity.
In fact, that's a huge deal. I'm working with some students at Dartmouth right now, and at least in Vermont, it looks like the current capacity of the grid is about 1.2 gigawatts, and you'd have to move it to 4.5 gigawatts to meet all.
Because of the increase demand?
To meet peak load on the cold, like that minus 19 day, would be, you'd have to put in roughly 3 gigawatts of transmission capacity in the state of Vermont alone. So we're gonna come up to that problem here in the next 10 years where people are gonna have some kind of peaking system in their house, probably their existing hot water system or something like that, or furnace that they have. And that's gonna be hard to squeeze out that last 10% or something like that. But it's gonna put real pressure on the distribution grid because and Mark, you would know the numbers better than me, but I think a lot of people are probably putting in 40,000 BTU per hour mini splits or something like that. So you need 4 or 5 kilowatts of extra energy. And if you put an induction, I would guess your induction stove is another 8 kilowatts.
It's a monster.
So all of a sudden.
It was like all of a sudden my electric bill went up and I said, that's
Yeah.
gotta be wrong. And then I realized that I plugged that thing in. And, so I feel good that I'm not having, gas in my house, but,
And maybe
change my
this is a
own-
conversation for another day, because I think that pursuing the aggregate, this is my personal opinion, pursuing the community choice, what's the downside? It's gonna take some
Yeah.
people's time.
Right,
There are many more questions that are coming up today, though, about, well, where do we really need to land in 15 years? Because this rush to electrify, although I think a good idea in general, is gonna run into some real challenges in northern rural states like ours, where it's gonna be really hard to meet the coldest days of the year.
Plugging the holes is the place to start, though.
Yeah.
right.
And despite I think that there's enough people in the town who don't have their own solar systems and they're not worrying about net metering that will really benefit from, the aggregation. And so I think it's a really positive thing for the community to be
Just,
looking
I-
at that alternative.
I had heat pumps over this cold snap, and they did fine. They kept heating. I was surprised,
Yeah.
that they actually performed. I was expecting their efficiency to just drop out.
It does, so.
But I'll
The
tell you.
COP at minus 19 is 1, it's the same as electric
But
resistance
it was
heating.
keeping things warm, so.
Yeah, there was a question.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to, it seems to me through this conversation that you certainly don't wanna shut anything down in these options. We wanna, as a town, continue to encourage people to put in arrays and that sort of thing. So I think that can't get lost in all of this, where it's like, okay, we've got this coalition that you can sign up with, but all that energy's gotta come from somewhere.
Exactly.
And there is a real advantage to it being distributed, so I think that care has to be taken that motivation doesn't get lost as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my sense of the coalition and the towns that have joined is just very much like where we are, where they, they've had solarized programs, they wanna move to renewables. They're, I think down the road, they're looking at, where the coalition might get their power locally, so I think that's in the future, because it's all very new and.
Well, it's like getting local agriculture, that'll be a refinement to like the green product mix, if you can get local green, for your power.
Do we have any sense as to how competitive, these 1 to, or half a megawatt to 1 or 2 or 5 megawatt facilities are to the power that the coalition is gonna have access to? And, I'm thinking about wind power off the, out in the ocean and stuff like that. Is that cost, is the solar cost competitive against that kind of power, and is that kind of power coming on?
Solar can be cost competitive, probably at a bigger scale. I mean, if you're talking 1 to 5 megawatts, it's gonna be, solar's a technology that really benefits from economies of scale. And so, you know, there are some 50 megawatt projects like in Maine that I think have contracts to sell their power at about 5 cents a kilowatt hour, something in that range. So it's pretty competitive. That's a wholesale contract, it's not a retail rate. Offshore wind, now, I think the cheapest contract I've seen there is about 7.5 cents. So it's still pretty expensive. The advantage there is scale, you know, you can put massive amounts of capacity out in the ocean. I don't know, does that answer your question?
I'm just trying to get a sense as to, you know, if we have the aggregation group and, you know, we end up going out looking for power, and then we're also maybe developing some larger scale PV here, and all of a sudden people are going, oh geez, I should have waited for the aggregation because that's gonna be cheaper, or maybe vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely needs to be a little bit of coordination here. You know, the commercial model that I ran through, if you, maybe you didn't follow that, it's a little complex, but that was basically just a discount off your bill. That could presumably work in concert with the aggregation, I would think. I don't know, but that's kind of one of the open questions, like, can we do a group net metering system whereby group members save 3 cents a kilowatt hour off their bill if they are part of this aggregation, community power?
We're gonna get to find out
Yeah.
about that.
Yep.
But there was also the thing where apparently the cost sharing agreements that we would, you know, sign with CPCNH, I think they're like a yearly thing. So every year, you know, we can reassess and say like, well, this year actually, you know, we just had this big solar farm put in, and, you know, everybody's signing up for that, and we're getting a cheaper rate, so we're not gonna join the agreement this year.
And when you guys talk about a cost sharing agreement, like what cost are you talking about? Just the cost of the power, or is there some?
Yeah, that's
Just the
the
power.
name for the deal that you make with CPCNH for buying the power.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, you know, once we get there, that's when sort of the rubber is hitting the road in terms of, you know, we need to have our plan, we need to have our ducks in a row and know what we're getting into at that point.
And at that point, you'll see a whole year of history of
Yeah,
how
you-
these first 10, 15 towns have been able to purchase electricity, both the mix and the cost.
Do you know if any of these towns are considering how they meter and rate people? Like, are they gonna have time of use billing, or is it gonna be?
I think it hasn't been, hasn't been released yet about, you know, what
I would say yes, only because Lebanon is one of the first members,
Yeah.
and they have done a lot of work on time of use.
Okay.
And Clifton Philo is the head of the CPCNH, although they're looking to hire an executive director, or CEO or whatever. So I'm gonna guess that they will continue to look at that. And that's another, for those of us who have solar, you can't sign up for time of use.
Right. Yeah, I do know that like Hanover, already bulk purchases, you know, amongst the community, and, cause I work in the town office, we get alerts about when we're supposed to not have the AC on and turn off the lights when there's, gonna be major demand, like in, you know, hot summer days and that type of thing. So, you know, we work with the grid in order to enable others to have the power they need. It's a-
But it also sets price. It sets price. So at Dartmouth, they turn on their combined heat and power plant on the hottest day of the year. And they generate their own power, so their megawatt peak for the year is lower, and that sets price for the entire year. So they're gaming the system.
Damn them.
So do you guys have more you wanna run through, or?
No,
Okay.
that's pretty much it. We're, you know, learning the ropes,
Yeah.
but that's the
Yeah,
basics.
great.
Thanks.
Thank Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Does the planning board wanna have any formal time here, or?
Well, no, I mean, we got our work cut out. I mean, one of the things we have to deal with is fitting this into a regulatory system, you know, so, for instance, what was that? You were talking about forested land versus cleared land. I don't know that there's a mechanism for us to say, oh, you can only build this on cleared land, because we can't tell people that they can't clear their land. And that's one of the things we're faced with. You know, first of all, this is incredibly helpful, and I'd like to thank you and LEAC and Stephen, and everybody else who commented. It's incredibly helpful for us. And we're gonna have to hammer this stuff out, how to fit what's clearly beneficial into a system that's not set up for that, really, and that has, you know, there's a lot of reasons why there's planning, so we've gotta go and make it fit into what the purposes are. But this gives us a lot more information to work with, and incredibly helpful. And we're, I think I can speak for everybody, incredibly grateful for the input.
One of the things we struggled with the most, I think, was size limitations, and particularly on the high end. And one of the things I got from your materials that you presented was that it looks like without upgrades to the three-phase systems that Eversource or NEHC operate, it looks like there's about a 200 kW practical max about what you could put in. So, I don't know, in terms of thinking about the upper end of, if we were gonna propose something different than what we went around last time, is that a sort of practical real limit, or should we be thinking bigger than that?
Well, you know, again, you can always pay to upgrade the distribution system, and under the Inflation Reduction Act, you can now apply the investment tax credit to any sort of upgrade costs, which you could not do previously, so that takes care of 30% of the cost right there, so.
Is that an individual could do that, or would it have to be would more likely be a commercial?
Power company. Yeah, I think it's under, I think it's under the commercial credit, so, I'm not sure, I don't think that applies to the residential.
Okay.
You'd have to have a large tax bill. But I also think to answer part of your question there, I think what we'll find, Mark, is if you look at a very specific part of the three-phase system, and the technical people can convince themselves that it's almost gonna all be self-consumed. So for example, if it happened to feed into the center of Lyme here, and the school's always pulling 10 kW, and this is that, and this, and the firehouse, it might be that it consumes all that electricity under any reasonable set of assumptions in that very local region, which means that putting one out on River Road or somewhere else up by the skiway wouldn't be precluded, is my guess. It might mean that any individual system isn't bigger than 100 or 200 kilowatts, but that more could go on the system.
More of them.
More of them, yeah,
Yeah.
because it really depends on the local consumption.
Right.
I'm just trying to get a sense about whether there's a natural limit or because that's really one of the big
That's a biggie.
problems we face is, do we put a cap, and if so, what?
Or is there a cap?
And the last time I think we put a cap, and the cap was just us sort of going, well, that seems reasonable.
Right.
But is there a more informed way to make that
Well, I think-
decision, particularly on the upper end?
We can only put a cap on individuals. I mean, the Kearsarge fellow was saying you could put a townwide cap, and we chatted about that briefly, and we're pretty clear that you can't, within zoning and planning board authorities, put a townwide cap on how many
Right.
megawatt systems could be put in.
No.
So we have to draw up some rules that can be followed, and then if the three-phase power's not up to it, that's not our problem.
Right.
That's somebody else's problem
Well-
to fix.
Yeah, but the question is there some sort of a natural place to put that cap? Is that
You mean
thought
on
I was trying-
individual systems?
Yeah, on individual systems.
Yeah, well, maybe we can find that.
It's interesting, I'm, for other reasons, speaking to an engineer from Eversource. I just realized I could ask this question.
Great.
I also think the New Hampshire Electric Co-op people, I know a bunch of the senior people there, they'd be probably willing to say, well, here's what's really going on in our line that goes up Baker Hill or whatever it is. They've been looking really hard at transactive energy.
So do you think they'd be
and-
willing to speak to us?
Oh, yeah.
That might be a real
So
interesting thing to
would
do,
you-
is send an invitation to
would you
Eversource.
look into that?
Yeah, and Brian Calnan, he lives in Hanover. He's local enough for us, but yeah, no, he's.
That'd be great if you could do that.
Because you guys we ought to be at least talking to them, and honestly, like the CEO is no longer the CEO there now, but when I met him 5 years ago, 6 years ago, he literally said to me, Stephen, and he's a lawyer, he said, if it's in the best interest of our members, we should go out of business. So, I mean, that's a very different mindset than
Sure
Eversource,
is.
Yeah.
Sure.
right? And so they're gonna be looking at things that are benefiting their members, of which there are a number of them in this town.
Well,
So
great.
here, I'll be happy to connect
Thank
with
you.
you and connect you with them.
Terrific,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know that the energy committee is busy, but I think that the point that Stephen brought up about the capacity of the distribution system to serve our community is a legitimate one, especially if people are plugging in cars and running induction stovetops and that type of thing. And I don't know, what the limits are, or if everybody gets a mini split, that kind of thing. And is that something we need to be proactive about? Because I don't find that utilities are that proactive.
Yeah, I'm just not quite sure what we would do about that.
Well, no, it'd be working with the utility, and if
Yeah.
we're having a conversation.
It'd be good information to have.
We say we're a proactive community, lots of people are doing this, and how are you looking out to see that our distribution system's gonna be adequate?
I wonder if, in our work of, putting together an aggregation plan, we'll have a window into that,
Yeah, Well, it
because we
just-
are gonna get the data, we do need to get the data from the utilities about our usage.
Right.
And,
well, that's a good, like a little key thread to follow as you're doing that, because you might come across that information, how they plan and do stuff, because it seems like they're more reactive than they are proactive.
I think, I don't know, Jim, if you know this, but like in the CPCNH, you've probably read more of their info than I have, but it does seem like they have an eye towards this, like making sure that the infrastructure is, using this, power of, 20, 30 communities to
Right.
insist that the, infrastructure
Yeah.
it can handle what.
Right, well, I'm just thinking back on high-speed internet, how did that happen in our town, And so I'm a little concerned that we might be considered, because low density of backwater, and we wouldn't get the service like a more densely populated
Right.
place would. What happens with cable, fiber optic, and that, so just to try to stay in front of it for our community, I think is a good thing.
I'd like to say, I think this is great that we're all here face to face, because it really builds some human social capital. And I think that we need to not just increase the power of our power lines, but we need to, the information flow between all of us needs to increase. And we have to figure out a way to do it without violating any sunshine laws, but I think that the cross-fertilization between the groups and being able to call on the expertise when the planning board is hitting questions about sizing solar, get the right people in the room.
Well,
And
I'd
just
like to
sharing the information.
suggest that we, this should not be a one-off thing, because, as each of these entities moves forward, it's gonna be dynamic, and we're gonna be dealing with probably different things than we thought we would, so, I'm thinking we should, to your point, we should periodically, regularly anyway, meet.
I think Mark has suffered so long sitting with the planning board. And I want to acknowledge the
He
suffering.
should not be isolated with us.
Yeah, Yeah, no, he's put in so much
Yeah,
time, and I
yeah,
really
it's just been
appreciate all of
fantastic.
his
You still have
expertise
room
and
for other alternate members.
and patience, I know, but he's busy, so, but I really, really, your time is much appreciated,
Yeah.
because we'd be so far, much further off than we are
And,
if it
and
weren't for you.
your presentations and your letters are so well organized and detailed.
Yeah.
So we're gonna give you a special award tonight. I didn't want, we have a.
The planning board suffering
Play-
award.
play-
A second member, thank you, this is a terrific presentation tonight.
Yeah, so you're gonna get that to David?
Sure, yeah, I'll send a copy to
Okay.
you.
Perfect.
All right, anybody got anything else? All right, so I was gonna, we had a couple of people who have been attending, who are interested in being alternates. It's getting a little late tonight, so I'd like to ask your patience, and we can address that next time, if that's okay with
I'm
you.
gonna have an alternate for the zoning board. It seems to
Also-
go up to, bumping up to a full member who
Okay.
has lost Frank Bowles.
Right, so, but we
So-
don't have,
So next meeting, I'm gonna be bringing.
oh, we'll have to vote on that, okay.
Yeah, so.
Okay. All right,
Is it, do you decide on the alternates because you have to do it again after the election, don't you?
well, I don't know that it matters,
Alternates have terms.
Yeah.
It's a 3-year term for
Okay.
alternates, so.
So.
Okay, I
yeah,
didn't-
Your
Yep.
term will expire sometime,
But I was-
yeah, that's, sometime.
yeah.
Whenever.
I try to keep a track.
Yeah, right.
I try to keep track of that.
All right, anything else? Again, really thank you very much.
Yeah.
A couple things with just the planning board.
Yeah.
I have a new land use book right here.
Okay.
And also, if you're requesting information from the select board office, it goes through me, and that's it. I'm gonna, you're allowed. But, sending an email to another member of the office saying it's for the planning board, it's gonna end up through me, and I'm gonna say, no, don't fill that information, because it will be a board decision to get information.
So everybody got that?
If information is wanted by the board, it's the board who is asking, and it goes through me.
Duly noted. Duly noted.
Maybe. We just recycle.
Yeah, we just toss the,
By the way, it's Mr. Mustard in the living room with the billiard.
Recording stopped.
I gave it to Andy.
yeah.